Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are diving deep again, really getting into a place that holds just immense historical weight. It tells these incredible stories of resilience, of perseverance.
Hmm.
If you were with us for part one, we started exploring the powerful significance of Nakfa. So this is part two.
That's right.
And if you did happen to miss part one, we really, really recommend going back and listening to that first. It honestly sets the stage perfectly for what we're diving into today.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate something crucial from last time, all the information, every detail we're discussing today, it comes directly and solely from articles sourced from Shabait.
Yeah, that's key.
That's the lens. It's the perspective presented within that material that we're exploring. Our goal here is really to understand Nakfa's symbolism and history as described in these specific sources.
Exactly. So our mission continues, doesn't it? We want to unpack that powerful symbolism of Nakfa. Understand it as this incredible symbol of resistance, of perseverance.
Hmm.
And today, we're digging into the specifics, the details of the defenses that made it, well, legendary, and also looking at what the town's like today. Again, all based entirely on that Shabait material you shared.
It really is quite something, isn't it? How a specific location, just a point on a map really, can become so deeply, profoundly imbued with meaning through struggle, through sacrifice.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here is how these Shabait sources portray that transformation. It's not just geography, it becomes this enduring symbol.
Right.
Through the specific events, the immense will of the people involved.
Yeah.
As detailed in the Shabait context, Nakfa really represents resilience itself. It's literally etched into the landscape, into the stories.
Okay, let's unpack this first part then. The Shabait articles we're looking at, they really hammer home the military situation around Nakfa during the war. They describe these repeated attempts by the Derge regime, that's the Ethiopian military government at the time, trying to break through the liberation fighters' lines. And the forces call it an impossible task.
Yes, impossible.
So what exactly do these sources tell us about why? Why did their efforts fail so well, so decisively? Especially that infamous 6th offensive.
Well, the conviction in the sources' descriptions is really striking. They don't just say the defenses were, strong. They call the trenches unpenetrable.
Unpenetrable.
Yeah, and they state this was true with all cost, not even with massive interference of superpowers on the side of the Derge regime. Now, that's a significant claim in itself.
It really is. Massive interference of superpowers.
Right. It implies the defenders weren't just facing a local force. They were, according to these sources, holding the line against an adversary bolstered by significant external support, suggesting this huge disparity in resources and firepower. Yet, despite this alleged outside help, the lines around Nakfa held, completely firm. So the sources are really positioning Nakfa as this definitive barrier,
Right.
one that just could not be breached no matter the power thrown against it.
That phrase, massive interference of superpowers, it definitely adds this whole layer of global context, doesn't it, to what might seem like a regional conflict.
It does.
And the Shabait articles, they even use this really powerful comparison, to emphasize just how insurmountable the challenge seemed for the liberation fighters. They compare the 6th offensive, the Derge trying to break the EPLF, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front trenches. They liken it to David and Goliath.
That comparison drawn from the sources is incredibly evocative, isn't it? It's not just stating facts, it's framing the whole struggle in almost mythic terms.
Yeah.
Highlighting that perceived imbalance of power and really magnifying the achievement of the defenders. The sources, they explicitly describe the Derge's attempt on Nakfa as a mission impossible.
Mission impossible.
Yes. And one that ultimately led not just to a military loss, but, and I'm quoting here, to the defeat of its forces and its army into despair.
Despair. So it suggests the failure at Nakfa, especially that 6th offensive, was just deeply demoralizing for the other side,
Right.
based on these accounts.
That seems to be the implication. It wasn't just tactical. It was a blow to morale so profound it actually changed their strategic posture.
Changed their strategy.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, precisely as described in the Shabait sources. After this devastating defeat at Nakfa, the accounts tell us the Derge forces essentially gave up trying to attack the EPLF strongholds in that specific area.
Gave up entirely.
On attacking Nakfa directly, yes. They confined themselves, the sources say, to defensive positions in and around Alphabet and in other areas far from the strongholds of the EPLF around Nakfa.
Ah, okay.
So this strategic withdrawal, as it's presented in the sources, it really signifies the definitive failure of those huge repeated offensives against the Nakfa area specifically. The message from Shabait seems clear. Nakfa was the rock. These waves of attack, even the ones allegedly backed by superpowers, they just broke against it, and they were forced to pull back.
So the key takeaway here then, drawing straight from this Shabait material, is that Nakfa's defenses weren't just, successful in pushing back attacks. According to these sources, they were so incredibly formidable, the defense so effective, that they didn't just repel, they fundamentally crushed the morale. They eliminated the offensive capacity of this apparently heavily supported army in that critical zone, forcing this big strategic shift away from trying to take Nakfa itself.
That is absolutely the picture painted by these sources. Nakfa became, in their telling, the symbol of that unyielding front line, the place they just couldn't break.
Okay, now here's where, for me at least, it gets really interesting and quite visceral. The Shabait articles explain that you can really start to grasp the fierceness of the battle around Nakfa, partly by looking at the names the EPLF combatants gave to their trenches.
Ah, the trench names, yes.
It says every single trench had a name, and these weren't just random. They were chosen specifically to depict the ferocity of the struggle in and around them.
It's fascinating, isn't it? This practice of naming positions isn't unique, of course, but the specific names chosen here, as described in the Shabait sources, are incredibly revealing.
So?
Well, it's a way to process, isn't it? To categorize, maybe even to cope with just unimaginable conditions. The names cited in the articles you mentioned, Rigole, Volleyball, Fernello, Globe, letter P, Testa, Nakura, Symbol.
Yeah, quite a list.
They're not just labels on a map. According to the sources, each one is like a miniature narrative, compressing these intense, often brutal experiences into a single word.
Right.
And the articles mention that the series, they came from parts 2 and 3, apparently tried to explain some of these names precisely to give readers, a tangible clue about how trying the situation was and the sheer endurance demanded from the fighters holding those lines.
Okay, let's dive into some of them then. The stories behind them, as Shabait describes. First up, Rigole.
Rigole, yes.
The sources say it's Italian, meaning penalty kick in football, or soccer as some call it. Why on earth would a trench, this static defense, be named after something so specific and dynamic from a sport?
It's about proximity. The sources explain the name Rigole was chosen to indicate the sheer, terrifying closeness of the enemy.
How close?
It indicated how close the trenches of the enemy were to that of the EPLF combatants. The articles clarify, in some places they were separated by just some meters apart.
Meters.
Just a few yards.
Meters, yeah, imagine that. Maybe just feet separating you from the enemy position. The sources paint this picture of intense, constant closeness, noting they were so near that, quote, both sides could listen to every word uttered.
Wow.
And incredibly, over time, even both sides could call each other's with their names.
Hearing them talk, maybe recognizing voices, knowing names, all while living under this constant threat. That's intense.
It is.
The Shabait sources really emphasize the psychological toll of this. They actually pose the question, could anyone imagine staying for months in conditions like that?
Yeah. And they state very clearly, only those who happened physically there could explain the ferocity of the struggle and the endurance that was needed. It wasn't just holding ground, it was surviving this intensely personal, constant state of high alert, with the enemy literally within earshot, and enduring, as the source mentions, the constant rain of grenades and hand bombs.
That detail about hearing each other, maybe even calling out names, it provides this really haunting human dimension to the combat described in the sources, doesn't it?
It really does.
It just underscores the level of constant immediate threat and the incredible mental fortitude required.
Okay, next name. And this one is maybe the most striking one described. Volleyball.
Ah, volleyball. Yeah.
Again, we know the game. Two teams, a net, hitting a ball back and forth over it. How does that possibly describe a trench? Especially given the context of, ferocity.
This detail, as provided in the Shabait sources, is, well, it's truly remarkable. It speaks volumes about the extreme conditions and the fighter's response. The article suggests the initial connection might have been sort of metaphorical, the intensity, maybe comparing the difficulty of dealing with a hard volleyball smash to the challenges in the trench.
Right, like a tough situation.
But the core, absolutely astonishing story that gives the trench its name, according to Shabait, is this. When the enemy throws hand grenade on the EPLF fighters, it was common for the fighters to catch the hand grenade before it reaches the ground and explodes and throw it back to the enemy like that of volleyball ball.
Wait, they caught live grenades and threw them back? Like a volleyball.
That is exactly what the Shabait sources describe. The source material even exclaims, sort of in disbelief, "What a volleyball game."
I can barely comprehend that.
I know. This detail, if accurate as presented, highlights just an almost unbelievable level of courage, presence of mind, sheer nerve, incredibly quick reflexes, and maybe a kind of defiant resourcefulness under direct lethal fire.
Yeah, defiant is the word.
It elevates the name from just a simple comparison to a literal, albeit incredibly dangerous, description of actions apparently taken right there in the heat of battle.
That is an image that will definitely stick with you. It's hard to fathom the level of intensity, the bravery required for something like that.
It certainly provides a vivid, almost cinematic glimpse into the reality on that specific part of the front line, as narrated by these particular sources. A really powerful anecdote.
Let's move to Fernello. The Shabait articles explain that Fernello is an Italian word apparently used in Eritrea for a type of zinc corrugated stove.
Charcoal stove.
Right, the kind used traditionally to boil coffee or sausage, heated by red-hot charcoal inside. How did that analogy, that picture of intense heat, come to describe a trench?
Well, the combatants who actually held this particular trench, according to the Shabait accounts, they used this analogy to try and convey the environment they were forced to endure.
Okay.
They apparently recite that the trench was being turned into a hell with the continuous heavy artillery and aerial bombardment of the Derge regime.
Turned into a hell.
Yeah. So the comparison to the intense, glowing, red-hot charcoal inside that Fernello stove, it immediately conjures this image of extreme, unbearable heat. Constant pounding. It suggests the trench was under such relentless bombardment that it literally felt like being inside a furnace.
Just constant fiery bombardment.
Exactly. Yeah. And the forces note that surviving this hell on Earth, this state of being constantly shelled day and night, needed unswerving endurance beyond imagination.
Unswerving endurance beyond imagination.
And crucially, the sources make sure to emphasize that despite being in this living hell, the fighters' unflinching determination and willpower did not allow the enemy forces to succeed and advance even an inch.
So the name isn't just about the hardship.
No. It describes the incredible hardship that was overcome. It speaks to both the trial by fire and the refusal to yield despite it.
Okay, moving on. The sources mention testa and then describe it being replaced by globe. Testa, Italian for head, signifying a head-to-head fight.
Physical contact.
Right, involving physical contact between individuals. The articles really stress the extreme closeness here, noting no one could stand for a second to stretch his or body. No movement whatsoever. One movement means the end of one's life. That's terrifying.
Absolutely brutal conditions described there.
So what was globe then? And why the change from testa?
Well, the Shabait accounts explain that testa, which represented this really static, incredibly dangerous, almost face-to-face confrontation, was later replaced by globe. The actual design of the trench evolved.
How did it change?
Unlike testa and maybe other earlier trenches that were focused on this very direct, limited angle engagement, globe was designed, the sources say, to provide a much broader vantage point, a wider field of view.
Okay.
From the globe trench, according to the sources, one could control the enemy movement from every angle, so much better observation.
360-degree control, almost.
Something like that. The name globe was given, the sources state explicitly, to indicate its round-shaped formation as that of the Earth, reflecting this new, enhanced, all-around view and the control it offered the defenders.
Interesting.
So this transition, as it's described in the articles, it could represent a real evolution in defensive strategy or perhaps trench engineering on the ground, moving from that purely static, almost suicidal proximity of testa to a more tactical position, allowing for better situational awareness and ultimately better control of the battlefield.
That's fascinating, a clear shift from just a desperate, static head-to-head hold to a more strategic, perhaps more survivable, all-seeing position.
It suggests, based purely on these Shabait sources, a definite adaptation. Learning and improving tactics and design, driven by the harsh realities of the battlefield experience itself.
So when we look at all these trench names together, Rigole for the terrifying proximity, Volleyball for that unbelievable grenade-throwing defiance, Fernello for the furnace-like bombardment, Testa for the brutal head-to-head closeness, and then Globe for this evolving all-around control. What does it all mean collectively?
Well, drawing from the Shabait sources, these names are clearly far more than just simple labels. They are essentially compressed histories, each one a miniature story vividly capturing a different facet of the lived experience in those Nakfa trenches.
Right.
The extreme danger, the terrifying closeness to the enemy, the almost unimaginable intensity of the shelling, the necessity for quick thinking and, frankly, defiant action, the demand for sheer unwavering endurance, and even perhaps the evolution of strategy over time. They provide this incredibly powerful, granular glimpse into the reality of the struggle for Nakfa, transforming these abstract concepts of battle and resistance into concrete, human-scale experiences that honestly really stick with you. They make the history described in these sources feel incredibly tangible.
They really do bring it to life, don't they? Painting a picture that, mere military statistics or battle reports could never quite capture.
Exactly. They add that crucial layer of human perspective as captured by the fighters themselves and then relayed to us through these Shabait sources.
Okay, so moving from those individual trench stories, the Shabait articles we're exploring also touch on the broader historical significance of these, extensive defensive networks. They mention specifically the long trenches circling the enormous and proud Dendon Mountain as being among the very first major fortifications built, apparently during the Fourth Offensive. And the sources really highlight the importance of preserving these physical remnants today.
Yes, the perspective in these sources is quite clear on that. These trenches, particularly those on Dendon Mountain, and also the one they call Alphabet Trench, which the author of the Shabait article apparently witnessed, personally they aren't viewed as just, historical sites or archaeological curiosities.
No, what are they then, according to the source?
The Shabait articles describe them as living testimony for the perseverance, endurance, and high determination of the liberation fighter to reach their desired goal, the liberation of Eritrea from the yoke of colonialism.
Living testimony. That's powerful phrasing.
It really is. It elevates the physical structures themselves. They become these potent, enduring symbols of the entire independent struggle and embodying the qualities that were required to achieve it. They're seen as these tangible links, almost sacred links, to the sacrifices made there.
The articles also make this interesting sort of practical point about maintaining these trenches for history to posterity, for future generations. They state there's no need for sending experts to decide upon which material they were built. Why do the Shabait sources specifically point that out? What's the significance of the building materials?
It seems to be tied directly to their construction methods, as described in the sources. The articles explain it very simply and directly. They were built from the stones and trees found in the area.
Oh, local materials. Resourceful.
Exactly. It highlights this resourceful, almost indigenous construction method using just what was readily available on the land. Therefore, the sources argue, maintaining them requires only, quote, small effort and decision.
Okay, so it's easy to maintain them.
Relatively speaking, yes. They connect the physical durability and the simplicity of the construction to their immense historical value, emphasizing that these structures have made history in saving the lives of thousands of liberation fighters. And because they were built so basically but sturdily from local stuff, they could potentially survive long and become the source of pride for our past history with relatively minimal intervention needed.
Right.
It's presented as a very practical argument for preservation, rooted in the very nature of how the trenches were built and their crucial historical role in protecting lives.
So the sources connect the physical structures, the stones, the trees, directly to the lives they saved, and then to the national pride that stems from that whole history, presenting their preservation as, a clear imperative, and one that's achievable with minimal effort because of how they were built, using the land itself.
That's precisely the point the Shabait sources seem to be making here. The very simplicity of their construction underscores both the resourcefulness of the fighters who built them and, crucially, the accessibility of preserving this critical part of their national history.
Okay, so the Shabait articles then shift gears a bit. They move from the historical battlefield itself to paint a picture of Nakfa as it is today.
The present day.
And they use these really powerful, almost declarative statements to reinforce its enduring symbolic importance, even now in peacetime. They say things like, when we talk about Nakfa, we are talking about the center of the Eritrean people's dream for independence. And when we talk about Nakfa, we were talking about the hardship the liberation fighters have to go through with the only objective to liberate the country. And finally, when we talk about Nakfa, we are talking about the capital city of the Eritrean people's struggle for independence.
That repetition, that series of statements, as presented in the Shabait material, it explicitly positions Nakfa not just as a town anymore, but as the very epicenter, the embodiment of the entire independence movement.
Yeah, it really comes across strongly.
It's presented as being synonymous with the struggle, with the dream itself. And the articles then give a little historical context about the town proper, distinct from the surrounding trench lines,
Oh.
reminding us that Nakfa town itself was also fiercely contested. The Derge regime tried to regain control of Nakfa town with all its capacity, deploying what the sources claim was the strongest army in sub-Sahara.
Wow.
Yet the sources state the town stood firm in allegiance with the Eritrean liberation fighters, and it never gave up.
So the town itself resisted.
Exactly. It underscores that the civilian center wasn't just some passive backdrop to the fighting. It's presented in these sources as an active participant in the resistance narrative, right alongside the fighters in those crucial defensive lines surrounding it.
That definitely adds another layer. The town itself is portrayed as having its own resilience, its own kind of refusal to yield. So, okay, what do the Shabait sources tell us about Nakfa today? Moving past its wartime identity, focusing on the present.
Well, the articles describe Nakfa today as a city on the growing.
Growing? How so?
They contrast its state during the war, remembering it was once seemingly deserted for its inhabitants fled the area due to the war and heavy aerial and heavy artillery bombardment. They contrast that devastation with its present reality. It is now growing in population and service provision institution.
Okay.
So this signifies, according to these sources, a clear period of post-war recovery,
Yeah.
of rebuilding and development, as seen through the eyes of Shabait, of course.
Are there specific examples given of this growth and development? Things that give us a concrete sense of what that actually means on the ground?
Yes, absolutely. The Shabait sources list several specific institutions that are now present in the town. It helps paint a picture of a functioning, developing community.
Like what?
They specifically mention the School of Social Sciences, a technical school, a modern hotel, and also other public and private institutions.
A school of social sciences and a technical school. That's
Oh.
interesting.
It is, isn't it? The inclusion of those kinds of educational institutions suggests, perhaps, an emphasis on rebuilding human capital, developing practical skills in this post-war era. And the mention of a modern hotel, well, that implies a return to, or maybe the development of, infrastructure needed for visitors or commerce. A really stark contrast to the wartime devastation described earlier.
Yeah, definitely. And what about the broader area, the Nakfa subzone, for which the town is the administrative center? Do the sources give details about the community there today?
They do. The Shabait articles provide some demographic and infrastructure statistics for the entire subzone, giving us a sense of the population size and the services available.
What kind of numbers are we talking about?
They note a population for the subzone of more than 50,000. For education within that area, they list 6 kindergartens, 6 elementary schools, 3 boarding schools, and 1 high school.
Okay, quite a few schools.
And regarding health services, the sources note the presence of 1 hospital, 2 health centers, and 6 clinics. So these details combined, they provide a clearer picture of the scale of the community today and the kind of foundational social services, education, healthcare that are apparently accessible to the population in that region, according to these Shabait accounts.
The sources also mention something about the climate, a natural advantage.
Right. Just a brief mention, noting the town's specific location provides a moderate climate suitable for people to live in.
Okay.
It's a detail that speaks to the general livability of the area, maybe setting it apart from potentially harsher climates found elsewhere. And crucially, the Shabait articles bring the historical past and this developing present together in their concluding thought for this section. They explicitly highlight the future potential. They state, the history of Nakfa, the many different trenches, and the climate makes Nakfa a potential for tourism industry.
Ah, tourism potential, connecting
Yeah.
the past to the future.
Exactly. It directly connects that enduring legacy of the past struggles, the physical trench remnants as historical sites, and the present-day natural advantage of the climate, suggesting a potential path for future economic development for the region, explicitly linking its profound history to its future opportunities.
So, wrapping up this part of our deep dive then,
Yeah.
guided entirely by these Shabait sources, we've gone much deeper into the story of Nakfa. We've seen it portrayed as this place of almost impossible defenses, holding firm against powerful, apparently externally supported forces. We've explored those incredibly vivid, sometimes startling stories captured in the trench names Rigole and its terrifying proximity, Volleyball, and that unbelievable grenade-throwing courage, Fernello depicting the furnace of bombardment, Testa evolving into globe, maybe showing strategic shifts, all showing us the raw reality of close-quarters combat and just remarkable resilience.
Yeah, those names are powerful.
We've also looked at the lasting legacy of the trenches themselves, presented as these crucial historical testaments and, according to the sources, easily preservable because of how they were built.
Right, using local materials.
And finally, we've seen how Nakfa today, again according to these specific Shabait accounts, is presented as a growing town. Increasing population, developing schools, health services, and importantly, holding this potential for tourism, actively carrying its huge historical weight into the present and looking towards the future.
Absolutely. Based entirely on the Shabait material we've examined here, Nakfa really emerges not just as a geographic location where pivotal battles happened, but as this profoundly potent symbol. It represents, in these sources, the entire struggle for independence, the extraordinary perseverance needed to achieve it, and the eventual realization of that national dream. And the granular details provided in the sources, from that almost mythic account of throwing grenades back to the specific, deeply evocative names given to parts of the front line, they offer this powerful, human-scale view of history. It really complements and deepens the broader narrative of resistance and eventual victory presented in these particular articles.
So as we close out this part of the deep dive, what's a final thought that stays with you after exploring all this material from Shabait?
Well, this whole exploration, guided only by these specific accounts, it really does raise an interesting question for me. You consider the intense history they describe, those unpenetrable defenses, the sheer endurance demanded in trenches like Fernello or Testa, the immense symbolic capital the place holds.
Yeah.
And then you contrast that with its present-day reality, as depicted in these same sources, this growing town, developing institutions, but still featuring those enduring trenches as physical testaments, leveraging its climate.
Right. It makes you wonder, what does it truly mean for a place and for the people connected to it to carry such a heavy, such a significant, and such a celebrated past so explicitly into the future? How might that deep defining history continue to shape its identity, its path of development, maybe even its aspirations as it continues to grow? Moving from being primarily a symbol of struggle to also being a center of community and future potential. It's definitely something to think about, drawing directly from the narrative presented in these Shabait sources.
That's a great point to reflect on. Thanks again for joining us for this deep dive into Nakfa, inspired and informed entirely by these fascinating sources from Shabait.
Yes, thank you. We hope this exploration has given you all some valuable insights into the significance of this pivotal location, at least as presented in these specific materials.